Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. How y'all doing? I got to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the King's Highway. Ain't gonna let injustice turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let injustice turn me around. I got to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the King's Highway. Ain't gonna let no jail cell turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no jail cell turn me around. I got to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the King's Highway. Ain't gonna let old Satan turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let old Satan turn me around. I got to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the King's Highway. We're gonna march up the King's Highway. We're gonna march up the King's Highway. Yeah. Well, all right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rabbi Hillel Cohn.
We come from many traditions, but a time has come for us to speak with one strong voice. Let us affirm that we are all one family with the same wants and needs. Let us strive for a healthy planet, to work toward peaceful, loving relationships with all of humankind, to achieve our vision of seeing all people fed in body, nourished in soul, sheltered from rain and storms, and free from unnecessary fears. We are all one family with the same joys and sorrows. So let our efforts ever be intertwined, for we are indeed one family, grateful for the warmth and recognition that we can find in one another's hearts and faces. So let us in silence now remember those heroic men and women who left their comfort zones to join in the struggle for a truly great America. In silence, let us remember them.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone, and what a good day it is. On behalf of the entire University of California, Irvine community, I am delighted to welcome you to this timely and important event in the Chancellor's Distinguished Speaker Series, co-sponsored by UCI School of Law, which is kicking off its year-long colloquium series on hate in a period of political turmoil, and the UCI Office of Inclusive Excellence as part of its new Confronting Extremism initiative. First, can you please join me in thanking Michael Rambo and Rabbi Hillel Cohen for participating in today's event? It was really, that's the right way to do it. A beautiful start. Now, all of you are honored guests, but we are also honored to be joined by some of our distinguished elected leaders in Orange County. And so thank you for joining us today, California State Senator Josh Newman, Tustin Mayor Pro Tem Al Murray, and thanks to U.S. Representative Lou Correa for sending his staff. The events at the University of Virginia and Charlottesville last month were a dramatic and tragic reminder of long-standing features of the story of America, and also an illustration of new realities that we must all see clearly, and we are gathered here as part of our responsibility to see clearly. Helping us are two people, and it is my pleasure to introduce them, starting with Chancellor's Professor Michelle Goodwin. Professor Goodwin holds appointments at the School of Law, the Program in Public Health, the Department of Criminology, Law and Society, the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, and Stem Cell Research Center. She is the founder and director. Oh, there's more. No. There's way more. She is the beloved founder and director of the Center for Biotechnology and Global Health Policy at UC Irvine School of Law and its internationally acclaimed Reproductive Justice Initiative. Professor Goodwin is an elected member of the American Law Institute, a fellow of the American Bar Foundation, a member of the National Executive Board of the ACLU. She is one of the world's leading authorities on the regulation of medicine, science, and biotechnology, a prolific author and commentator, also a highly sought-after voice on civil liberties, reproductive health, cultural politics, and human rights. And pretend like you haven't already done it. Could you please welcome
Thank you.
And it is my very great pleasure and honor to introduce our very special guest. For 5 decades, the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. has been at the forefront of virtually every movement for empowerment, peace, civil rights, gender equality, and economic and social justice in this nation. Twice a candidate for president, his clear progressive agenda and his ability to build an unprecedented coalition inspired millions. The founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, he has received countless honors for his work in promoting human and civil rights and nonviolent social change, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2000. You may recall his 1984 Democratic National Convention speech, 50 minutes, where the television audience kept growing and growing, reaching 33 million viewers at the end, at a time well before Twitter, which meant people were on the phone saying, "You have to turn on the TV." Young Americans, he said, exercise the right to dream. You must face reality, that which is, but then dream of a reality that ought to be, that must be. Live beyond the pain of reality with the dream of a bright tomorrow. And of course, keep hope alive. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.
Well, I want to thank Chancellor Gilman for that very generous introduction, and also for all of you being here. And Reverend, thank you for being here. It's much appreciated. He actually has 2 more flights today, but he carved out time to be with us.
Because of Hurricane Michelle.
So I want to, when I phoned Reverend Jackson about this important conversation that we're having year-long on this, on the matters of hate, the rise of hate in a period of political turmoil, he agreed to do it. It was late at night that I called, and he picked up the phone. He said that he would do it, and he said, you know, do you have a pen? Are you writing this down? And he said, this is a defining moment in America. He said, much like Selma and much like Birmingham. And so I want to start with that, Reverend. Can you tell us why you think that Charlottesville and the events that took place there very recently is a defining moment in America for us right now?
Let me express my thanks to you, to the Chancellor, and to the friends who gathered there. There are several moments. One of them is when Columbus found America, so he discovered it. That was a defining definition of a relationship between Europe and original Americans who were victims of genocide. And then we don't know how many years they were here before he found it, so he discovered it. But 1619, the African slave trade started during about that season. And for 157 years of slavery, then the Declaration of Independence. They still had not worked out a definition for us, but we were 3/5 human by that definition. So when all those eloquent words were stated, we had been in slavery 157
So let me just mark that, 157 years at the point of the Declaration of Independence, African Americans, Black folk had been here and not independent.
1619 to 1776, 157 years, without a human definition. And then we fast forward to 1862, where Lincoln says we have this conflicting ideas between freedom and oppression, freedom and repression. And if I have to fight to save the Union, I will even free them. And the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, that was a defining moment because it first defined us as human beings for the first time, 244 years after we had arrived. 244 years, 244.
Can I take a moment just with that?
Yeah.
Because that really says something, right? This idea that for 244 years, people who were slaving in here in the United States did not have the definition of humanity, of being human. And that's something that is overlooked, right? I mean, when you think about an original fake news was that the black people who were here were not human.
Well, that legacy, that lineage is alive and very much romanticized today. And then when the war was fought, not just about blacks and whites, but about slavery and freedom, this symbol of Robert E. Lee down in Charlottesville, he had said, do not bury me in a Confederate uniform. I have statues around me, because he had been pardoned as opposed to charged with treason. He had been pardoned. And so it would be an affront to those who won the war to get on with the healing process. Don't erect monuments to me.
Let's take a moment on that, right? He said, don't erect any monuments to me. And in fact, that monument wasn't erected at the time of his death. It was erected 50 years after he died.
Indeed it was, and it really represents secession, slavery, sedition, and segregation. There's a lineage of thought there. But during that, after that 65 victory out of Gettysburg, I might add the abolitionists of France sent a Statue of Liberty as a gift for saving the Union and ending slavery. That's where the gift came from. It was not a welcome matter. It was a gift to America for ending slavery and for saving the Union, a gift from the abolitionists. And so Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, Republicans, 13, 14, 15 amendments, freedom, amendments. You fast forward to 1947, well, 1896 was the defining moment legally, because the successors to slavery maintained power, though they had lost the war. And so the Supreme Court ruled separate but unequal, in fact. And so you fast forward to 1947, when blacks were used in the military as cannon and Latinos as cannon fodder and Native Americans as cannon fodder. And when Truman said, we'll desegregate the military, Thurman broke away and formed the Dixiecrats. That laid the groundwork for the new era of Confederate flags and another era of symbols. I say that because we kind of have to walk through these days because all of the days are connected. And so we fast forward to 1964. Wallace was a Democrat. Bull Connor was a Democrat. All of the Southern Democrats, they were Jefferson Davis breakaway treason Democrats. When we got the right to vote, Lincoln Republicans became Kennedy Johnson Democrats, and Jefferson Davis Democrats became Strom Thurmond, Goldwater, Reagan Republicans. They changed parties. So many modern-day conservatives do not know what they're conserving. They're conserving a heritage of oppression. And I might add, slavery was not just applied as a concept. Blacks did not have humanity and could not vote, but white women did not have the right to vote. There were white indentured servants. Native Americans put on their Bantu stands called reservations. Workers didn't have the right to organize. So to bring it right to where we are today, in 1965, blacks didn't have the right to vote in the South. White women couldn't serve on juries. 18-year-olds couldn't vote those serving in Vietnam. You couldn't vote on campus. You couldn't vote bilingually in 1970. Proportionality is 1988. So in the very modern season of the redefinition of, we moved from looking at America through a keyhole to looking at America through a door, because we had to make room for everybody. And that struggle today between what's conserving the worst of yesterday and the best of today and tomorrow, that we have a tug of war for the soul of America. We must not give up on that tug.
So you have said, in the streets there are people saying that we need to make America great and that America is not great right now. But you've been saying that America is the best that it has ever been. How do you reconcile what's in the streets and what was in the streets in Charlottesville with the tiki torches and no longer hoods and the kind of modernization of white supremacy? How do you reconcile that against what you've said is that this is the best that we've ever been? That's a hard message for a lot of young people in the audience to grasp.
From 1880 to 1940, 5,000 blacks were lynched and a few Jews, and that was legal. Today it's illegal. The law is on our side. The best we've ever been. Women didn't have the right to serve on juries. Now women on the Supreme Court, if you will. Across the South today, from Maryland down to across to Texas, when Dr. King gave the speech, according to what I Have a Dream speech, that day from Maryland to Florida to Texas, we couldn't use a single public toilet. Black and brown soldiers had to sit behind Nazi prisoners of war on American military bases. We couldn't buy ice cream at Howard Johnson's. We couldn't rent a room at Holiday Inn. We had to come north to Washington on a full military lockdown because the fear there was going to be a riot. They put the military at the airport and at the train station and 300 miles around. They were on active duty that day. And we were out the basic rights. I dream of a day we'll have the right to use public facilities. We won that battle. And so now, when the Carolina Panthers played the Atlanta Falcons, it would have been illegal for them to play together, their parents to sit together 50 years ago. We're the best we've ever been. You couldn't have had the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. They couldn't have played together or gone to school together, nor could the relatives have sat together in the stadium 50 years ago. We brought those barriers down. You couldn't have Honda and Toyota and Boeing behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. We brought those curtains down. You put two seeds in the ground of equal strength, and you feed both of them with water, and you build a wall between them. One grows taller with stronger stems and limbs, and one is shorter. It does not mean the tall is better. The shorter is worse. It means something called photosynthesis. The one that had the light was able to grow. When the walls come in, we can all grow. And that's important because we did not know how good baseball could be till everybody could play.
Or wait, let's take a moment. How many of you following the U.S. Open? Talk about until people could play when you have 3 black women going into the semifinals.
Well, the significance of why there's such a rave, if you had 60,000 folk at a football game on a Sunday afternoon and 10 marching outside with the robes on, there'd be as much time on the media on the 10 as on the 60,000. That's a false view of reality. The reality is those 10 cannot stop those 50,000 from the new rules. Why are African Americans and Latinos so good at football, for example, as one sport? Repeat that. Whenever the playing field is even. 10 yards.
10 yards.
For all first downs.
For first
6
downs.
points.
6 points.
For all touchdowns.
For all touchdowns.
Whenever
the
playing field is even.
The playing field is
Rules
even.
are public. Goals are clear.
Goals are clear.
Referees are fair.
Referees are fair.
And the score is transparent.
And the scores are transparent.
We can accept the outcome.
We can accept the outcome.
But beyond the athletic field, the playing field is not even. Prenatal care, Head Start daycare, it's not even. Effort and excellence means a lot. Inheritance and access means more. To believe otherwise is to believe in race supremacy, race inferiority. Our being behind is a social condition. It's not a natural condition. We must overcome those barriers that all of us get better. Now look in this audience. This is a little United Nations.
It is. I am so happy with our UCI community.
But it didn't start this way. And it takes effort to build up on this. But those who are here must see added value in multiculturalism. You must see the value in it, in living. We've survived apart, Michelle. Learning to live together is the challenge of the human race. And when I hear this talk about Make America Great Again, we're the best we've ever been. We have some bad outcomes. But we have checks and balances. And so when one bad outcome tried to stop refugees, the court said, no, that's not legal. When the bad outcome said, we're going to stop immigrants, said, that's not American.
Well, let's talk about that, because there are lots of young people, including many on our campus, that are deeply concerned about the rhetoric of the wall and deeply concerned about DACA. We have young people who've grown up in this country, whose parents have worked hard, who pay their taxes, have contributed to our country, and their kids have, and now they fear what's coming next with this rhetoric of the wall and also with DACA. How should they be thinking about this moment?
DACA is especially cruel, immoral, and unnecessary. But there's a narrative that says that the first naturalization order law, only white males with high moral character are citizens. For everybody else, we were born in the sin of genocide and shaped in the iniquity of slavery. We're better than, say we were born.
We were born
in the sin.
In the sin.
Of genocide.
Of genocide.
And shaped.
In the shame.
In the iniquity.
And inequity.
Of slavery.
Of slavery.
And gender.
And gender.
Oppression.
Oppression.
We're better than what we were born in. One thing worse than slavery is that it was legal. One thing worse than women being denied the right to vote, it was legal. We've changed the law, and that's what civil rights struggle is. We've changed the law. We've torn down structures. We've torn down walls and built bridges. We must not allow the naysayers to make us roll those bridges up. There's a struggle of war today for the soul of America. We cannot if you're trying to rope a loose and don't vote, then you're in fact conceding. We've come too far to concede. So we're better.
We are better
than what we were.
Than what we were.
We're better.
We're better
than what we were born in.
Than what we were born in.
Born in the sin.
In the sin.
Of Native American.
Of Native American.
Genocide.
Genocide.
Born. In the sin.
In the sin.
Of slavery.
Of slavery.
Born.
In
the sin.
In the sin.
Of racial apartheid.
Of racial apartheid.
Born. In the sin.
In the sin.
Of gender.
Of gender.
Repression. By law. And by culture. We're better than that now. That's why we have these positions. And so there are those who feel threatened by the new America, and so they look for some scapegoat. The jobs they lost didn't go from white to black or male to female. They went to automation and globalization. But when they look at America through a keyhole rather than through a door, they can't see the real world. So I watched all the coverage lately.
Yes.
About the Houston and Hurricane Harvey and its devastating impact. 100,000 people were evacuated in Nigeria, in India, in Nepal, mudslides in Sierra Leone. This is global warming. It's not as if we're convinced, and a wall cannot stop Hurricane Harvey.
Now that is the truth.
And nice houses in Miami Beach cannot stop Hurricane Irma. And so nice houses does not protect us from the sin of greed and violating the earth.
That's a very important point. When I think about your legacy, many people say that but for your activism, your commitment, there wouldn't have been the opportunity that Barack Obama had and that Hillary Clinton had. And when people say that, I wonder if they really do understand the work that you did. And so I want to just take a moment with our audience, if you don't mind, to think that through. And we might need some extra water here on stage. How's that? You got some there? All right. All right. And that is, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. Many people think that he died in 1963 after the March on Washington. They don't realize that it was 1968 and it's Robert Kennedy that same year. And in the time before that, as you saw many of our audience on the screen, so many other people each year dying. I mean, just the horrible things, right? The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. I mean, people were just absolutely ruthless. There's a timeline at the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, and it's stunning because it only captures a couple of years, but there was so much terrorism against African Americans that it's blip, 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 how many churches bombed, homes bombed, and so forth, all of that. But then, after Dr. King's assassination, there's this one person who was steady. And for those of you who were able to watch the screen, you might have even noticed him on Sesame Street. You were everywhere. And absolutely everywhere. And at a time, I mean, when you think about a time in which people need healing to take place, you were that lone person, and clearly there were other people, but you were at the forefront of our nation's healing. Can we give it up to him for that? Because you really were.
There's a defining legal pretext to that, because From 1896, when they made our connecting with each other illegal, the 54th the Supreme Court decision
Brown v. Board of Education
brought that barrier down. And Mrs. Park said that she and Attorney Fred Gray used to meet every Wednesday to figure out how to test that decision legally. We live under in our faith, we live under the law. How can we see if this law is valid? And so she sat down to test the law. This narrative, she's a washerwoman, her feet was tired and all that. She was an activist. She meant to challenge the law. And the boycott was a factor, but the bigger deal was we won the legal decision in 1956. Rosa Parks sat down, and I asked Ms. Parks, why didn't you go to the back of the bus? You could have been thrown off the bus, could have been hurt. She said, I thought about going to the back. I thought about Emmett Till, I couldn't go back. He was killed August 20, 1955. She sat down December 1st, 1955. And out of that emerged Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Out of that emerged the last stage of ending the legal dimensions of the civil rights, of the civil wrong of 1896. The 54th decision, the final moment, the 664 Civil Rights Act, 651 Rights Act. I emerged in that season. And Dr. King was killed in
He
April.
was killed in that season. He was killed in 1968. He was part of that season.
But we didn't have the right to vote. I couldn't have run, and that came in that season. And my point is that we're awfully connected. And in that season, that's why coalition means. In that season, Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed, and in that Serena Goodman and Cheney were killed, 2 Jews and a black. In that season, Valerie Luizzo, an Italian-American mother, was killed. In that season, Meg Edwards was killed. In that season, martyrs emerged whose blood forced us to go forward by hope and not backwards by fear in that season. I came out of that season of work, and frankly, had settled for just being an organizer. And then we thought we could win the mayorship of Chicago, which was a big deal.
Harold Washington.
We thought it was a big deal. And Mundell and Kennedy would come to Chicago to support Jane Byrne to defeat us in Daley in the primary season. I said, someone has to run against liberals to become morally bankrupt if they would not let us even become mayor of a major city. And out of that turmoil, I began to run. And the reason where the rainbow came from, I would go to a convention, there would be some blacks fighting for basic civil rights, Latinos fighting for bilingual education, Native Americans fighting for recognition, for treaties beyond that, women fighting for gender equality. So together, there are more of us out here than in there. We are a rainbow. We're a multiracial, multicultural coalition. We represent the globe, they represent the map. Most people in the world today, in the globe, are Asian, half of them are Chinese. 1/8 African, 1/4 Nigerian. 2/3 of our hemisphere speaks Spanish. English is a minority language in our hemisphere. 6% in North America, 6% Russian republics. Most people in the world today are yellow, brown, black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. We must relate to that world, not just our own GPS.
I hear you. So on that note, so Chancellor Gilman pulled out your 84 speech. You'd think that we had coordinated this because I want to talk about 88. And it's profound because in 1988, you were talking about how we must never surrender. And I want to make 2 points. You pointed out women and women's equality. You said we must never surrender to inequality. You said that women can never compromise on their equal rights or comparable worth. And you said women make 60 cents on the dollar to what men make. So I guess we have done better now. It's about 78 cents on the dollar. But here's what you said, and it was really profound. You said women cannot buy meat cheaper. Women cannot buy bread cheaper. Women cannot buy milk cheaper. And you concluded that thought with saying women deserve to get paid for what they do. It's right and it's fair. And that was really profound. can I also add, and then you can respond, that you didn't end there, because at that time, HIV and AIDS ravaging our country, there were members of Congress who said publicly and proudly, let them die. That was the tone of the 1980s, let gay men die. It's not our issue and our concern. They're sinful. But you said on the platform of the Democratic National Convention, you said, those who have AIDS tonight, you deserve compassion. Even with AIDS, you must not surrender. And you said, no one should look down on you. The only justification we have for looking down on people is to stop and pick them up. And that was very profound.
Well, women are free but not equal. African Americans, we got freed in 1865, but never equal. That's why today, because of the lingering impact of that season, as it were, we always got freer but less equal. Today, the gap, horizontal gap, is not so great as the vertical gap. And when you want to switch from covering $25 billion worth of 25 million people to make it a tax subsidy, there's something sinful about that. We need a single-payer health system for everybody. Because we must deal with care first and then cost. When my mother was sick and dying a few years ago, we had no idea what the cost was. The issue was, let her breathe as long as she can. The issue first was care, then cost. I cannot imagine, well, we can't make the payments, we let her die. That would have been disgraceful. But we can afford to care. People care that we know, but they must know that we care. Caring matters. If our premise is care, we can always handle costs. Today we have too few people making too much and too few making too little. And therefore there's an ideological struggle. Student loan costs too much today. Student loan debt is greater than credit card debt. That is a shame upon our nation. Credit card debt, student loan debt is greater than credit card debt. We deserve better than that.
So in fact, I want to take this moment then to turn to more about you from that 88 speech as well, because I think it's a message for our students now. You were saying to the audience that people see me as Jesse Jackson and on television, and they think that I'm not of you. And you said you wanted to correct that evening. One of the things that you said is that when you were born without a name. You said that your grandmother gave you her name. You were born and you were Jesse Burns until you were 12 years old. And you also said that for people who were viewing that night, you wanted them to know that you see them. And you said that you may have been born in the slums, but not born of the slums. You also said that you saw young people who were living in poverty, and you wanted them to keep hope alive, and you wanted them to keep resisting. And you told the story about Thanksgiving. And you said that on Thanksgivings, you did not have dinner at 3 p.m. You and your brother played football, and then your mother was cooking and working for other people. And you would have to wait until she got off the bus that evening with the leftovers. I think you said the carcass and whatever was left over of cranberries and whatnot. And then your family ate at 8 p.m. that night with your mother. Why was that message important to send to young people?
I was trying to identify with people whose plight that was, who had no place in TV ads, that we all matter, that when you reduce your irreducible essence and your back is against the wall, you are still somebody. God alone distributes genius. He distributes genius all over town. No one has a monopoly on genius. You never know that the poorest child may have the genius to cure cancer. You may have the genius to redirect the course of our nation. And so I was saying just because you're down doesn't mean you're out. We fall down, but the ground is no place for a champion. Get back up. You don't drown because the water is deep. You drown because you stop kicking. Don't stop kicking. Keep going forward by hope and not backwards by fear. That's what I was trying to say.
You did a great job of saying it, too.
And I'd say this in people's homes in Appalachia. I think one of the big mistakes Democrats have made the last few years, they've conceded Appalachia to Republicans as if somehow that is their zone. A coal miner dies every 6 hours from black lung disease today. One of the ingenious things Lyndon Johnson did, he did the war on poverty. He opened it up in Appalachia. If he'd done it in Harlem, he'd been dismissed. He's just holding a black baby. He's trying to impress Adam Powell. Dismissed it. He opened up his Poor People's Campaign in Appalachia. Most poor people in America are white, female, and young. They too want education and health care and a wage. Many who are trapped in the fear and they've been taught to hate can get better. If there's a wall between us, on the other side of the wall is ignorance, and then fear and hatred and violence. The walls come down, we become less ignorant, less fear, less hatred, and less violent. We must believe that every human being can be redeemed. We must believe that. That's an article of faith. We can be redeemed. Now, you must sometimes alter the behavior of those among us who are sick, but believe that they too they can change. And to not believe that is to figure out a way to eliminate them. We must figure out a way to include people. We must see America as one big tent, all in and none out.
Wow.
The white male supremacists, they see themselves in and others out, except they are a minority. This last election, they won on the freak of a count that must be discounted. Kennedy beat Nixon by 112,000 votes, less than 1 vote per precinct. Nixon beat Humphrey by 500,000. Carter beat Ford by 1.5 million. She won by 3 million votes. No one has ever won by 3 million votes and lost before. What happened?
Wow.
Well, let's look at what that means. They say, well, she lost the Electoral College. Electoral College is a part of the lineage of slave numbers. Well, it says she lost because of Russian hacking. They affected the environment. She lost because of a Comey. She lost because of black and brown voter suppression. The people who denied us the right to vote have never given up on denying, on nullifying the vote. And so Rainbow is opening up a commission next week in Washington on voter suppression. There is no voter fraud. There's consumer fraud, but there's no voter fraud.
Reverend, I want to take this moment to introduce Rabbi Kahn.
Just must say that we won this election. Hillary did, and if she had won, we'd be describing how ingenious the campaign was. Fact of the matter is, she won, and we must address the issue. When Al Gore wins and then loses, what happened? Well, they say national voting is a state's right. Watch this. When Bush got a 538 vote lead, they stopped the count with 27,000 black votes uncounted. State's right. She won with 3 million. They say 3 million doesn't matter because it was electoral college. That's fake math.
It's time to welcome Rabbi Kahn onto the stage with us so we can continue this conversation.
Right.
Thank you very much. All right. So, 2 champions of civil rights here, and this is a perfect moment to think about the conversation that we're just having on nations and voting and whatnot. And Rabbi, I'm moved by the fact that when you came to the United States, you came as a baby, because your parents were fleeing the Holocaust.
Right.
This year that we're marking this series of conversations that we're having, 2017 marks the 70th anniversary of the doctor's trial at Nuremberg. 2018 marks the 50th year anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. I'm really proud and honored to have both of you on the sofa,
Well, thank you.
seated next to me.
Thank you.
Everybody, you came as a baby. Where's your documentation, buddy?
So,
DACA.
he is
DACA,
Dr.
baby. we were not documented either, so we in the same boat
Right,
again.
undocumented. Right.
We're undocumented.
So one thing that's very interesting that you see in Charlottesville and across the country right now with those who are saying that our nation needs to go back to whatever they believe the nation was, there's a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment in that, a lot of it. What do you think accounts for that at a time and in places where many of these people have probably grown up never seeing or even knowing Jewish persons? I mean, what have Jewish people done to them?
It's very disturbing, and I think, but I do want to just preface my response to that by telling you that I have, for a long time, felt that there are two roles that religion plays, and that the clergy plays. And one of those, it's a very often heard phrase, one of those is to comfort people at times when they're disturbed, to offer consolation and sympathy. And religions, by and large, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, do that well. What we don't do as well is to disturb the comfortable. And Reverend Jackson has been one of those who has disturbed the comfortable, and that's a most important voice, an eloquent voice in our world today. And I'm appreciative of that, Jesse. That is in the mood of the ancient biblical prophets who were there to disturb people when they were comfortable. Now, in response to your question, Michelle,
let me just take one moment to say that I've been on the stage, well, I've been in the audience when you've been on the stage, and I've seen you also disturbing the comfortable too, and we're going to talk about that as well.
I think one of the things that Charlottesville particularly made us aware of is that there has been racism, sexism, gender inequality. There have been all these things, including anti-Semitism, but as Reverend Jackson said, much of that has been regulated in terms of the overt expression by the law. But there has always been that very subtle underlying racism and anti-Semitism. And when it comes to the fore, it really scares the living daylights out of you.
So what accounts for this fear? And both of you can, answer this. At a time in which Reverend has said this is the best opportunities that folks are having, what then instills and inspires the attitudes we're seeing?
Anxiety is in search of an object of fear, and therefore scapegoating comes in. In Chicago, last year, Nabisco, which makes saltine crackers and Oreo cookies, and 6 of the workers who make like $35 an hour, they shipped those jobs to Salinas, Mexico, where they make $1 an hour. The Mexicans didn't take jobs from us. We took jobs to them and made a profit. So somewhere between slave labor, automation, and globalization, the jobs went. The leadership will interpret that in that way, or you can say the Mexicans took your jobs. And so leadership has a lot to do with stirring the flames of hatred to get people a false sense of hope and take their job. What we've done, we've globalized capital. We've not globalized human rights and workers' rights, women's rights, and children's rights.
And I think that we're reaping the harvest of this very dangerous thing that's been an undercurrent in society, in American society, and that's an arrogance that, and we hear it expressed in terms of white supremacy, but there are all kinds of arrogant supremacist feelings that then pick on someone else as the target of their hatred. And we've seen that. Anti-Semitism is one of those. Unfortunately, owes its roots in some ways to some very classical Christian anti-Semitic feelings that were perpetuated in the church, which fortunately among liberal churches I think has, there's been a great change, but it's still there.
Let me tag on this, and I'm curious as to how both of you would respond to this. I'm stunned in the reports of kids who are 15, 16 years old, who are the ones that are desecrating Jewish cemeteries.
They were not born that way. That's taught behavior. That's learned behavior. That's learned behavior. I was telling Rabbi, I was with a group the other night who were talking about the Jews killing Jesus. The fact of the matter is, the order to finally kill Jesus was Pilate, who was Roman. That's the fact, historical fact. What happened was Jesus was a rebellious, poor Jew fighting for justice, who upset the scheme of things. And the rabbis, afraid of his changing, backed away. And Herod, in his confusion, said, I can't make up my mind because I can't find any guilt, and all went up to the crowd and had him killed. On that simple piece of history, it was popularized by Hitler into the justification for killing 6+ million people. And so ignorance is a powerful tool.
It is.
And fear is a powerful tool. We must fight ignorance and hatred and fear and violence. That's why we must be very clear. When the NAACP was founded, it was not founded in the U.S., it was founded in Canada. Niagara, founded by Jews and blacks in Canada.
So let's just pause on that point, because I think it's sometimes...
Well, Kitty Kaplan and so on.
Was its president.
Absolutely.
You saw pictures surrounding them, 2 Jews and a black were killed. Right. The blood we shed together is non-negotiable blood. No matter what little rancors here and there, our blood shed in common graves is non-negotiable. We must find common ground.
That is so true.
Well, the fear and the label attached to people being, as Reverend Jackson just said, in 2,000 years ago, the Jews were a very subversive people. They were talking about a value system that was counter to the popular way of governing things. And we have a fear of those who are subversive. But it's good to be subversive. Subversive means to test the law and to test the system.
And one time, so one point that I recognize as a law professor when I'm talking through cases that deal with segregation and other pernicious things, oftentimes for black folk in the South, there were Jewish people from the North who were coming down and providing the legal services when they could not get legal services locally.
And they were acting out their understanding.
So you get these 2 guys on a sofa.
Well, they were acting out their understanding, fortunately, of some basic Jewish principles, and that is that you need to not only talk about justice, but you need to walk the talk. You need to pursue justice in whatever way it is. If that means challenging the legal system and advocating for changes in legislation, that has to be there. But it also has to be going down and doing the voter registration as they did.
We're facing now a counter-cultural revolution. All that we fought for is now on the line being tested. That's why we cannot surrender. Some people are embarrassed by Trump's antics. They're not disgusted with his direction. If he just didn't tweet, it'd be all right. His direction is the issue, not his tweeting. So when he is able to employ Jefferson's Beauregard Sessions as the Attorney General, who took the position, the Voting Rights Act was an imposition on states' rights, that's a direction issue. When he is able to argue about his tweeting, and here's a guy that is willing to close Planned Parenthood, willing to say a Mexican judge cannot dispense justice because he's Mexican. President Barack Obama was not born in America and therefore discredit his being. When they're willing to Missouri, they took $10 wage and reduced them to $7 an hour. when they have a low regard for women and people of color, it's direction. We need a new direction, not just a new tweeter.
All right, so point well taken, point well taken. Here's a point. With both of you, you both have come out very strong about women's rights, and I want to spend a moment on that too, because that's not something that would necessarily be anticipated. So as I alluded to before, being in the audience and seeing you on the stage, Rabbi, and you were really profound in talking about why it is so important that we pay attention to women's rights, women's healthcare rights. You've said similar things, Reverend Jackson. Why? Why do you, as men of the cloth, see it as important to talk about women's reproductive health care and that these are decisions that should be left to women?
Well, I think a very simple answer is that equality is not based on gender. Equality is based on the fact that we're human beings. And women are not only entitled to, but are deserving of, and this is the way this is true justice. Now, our histories, going back thousands of years, did not see women in that light. They saw women as being patronized by men.
Property.
You know, as chattel, absolutely.
Yes.
We have come a long way. You know, we have to understand that there has been an evolution, a necessary evolution of attitude, a necessary evolution of behavior. We haven't gone far enough. When there are still places where women are not receiving, what did you say, 76 cents on the dollar or whatever it is?
Even worse for black
women.
women.
We have a long way to go.
Yes.
You know, when women are deprived of their choice by the absence of places where they can have that choice played out, we have a long way to go.
What side of history are you on? I remember when I first went to South Africa. I got in by chance in 1979 with the National Council of Churches. I was naive enough to think I could kind of ease in the country. At the airport, and no pre-press conferences and the like. There's a big bevy of press there. They were, why are you here? I said, I'm here to visit friends. Why are you really here? I said, I'm here to look at what I read about. Why are you really here? So I can see the country. Why? What's your politics? I was struggling to say something conservative, which was about to give me an aneurysm. I said, I believe in human rights for all human beings. Measure human rights by one yardstick. That's it. I give human rights for all human beings. Measure human rights by one yardstick. To tyranny, that is a threat. We must forever be maladjusted to tyranny. Women have the right of self-determination. Men have the right of self-determination. And one does not have the right to determine the otherness's determination. It's just fundamental and philosophical. Men must stop at their domain level. And so women should support men's right to be, and vice versa. We are all on one playing field, one plane.
All right. Now, T. Michael Rambo, I think, is soon to come out perhaps with some questions, but before he does, from the audience, I want to drive back to Dr. King. In 1966, Dr. King, in a speech where he was receiving Planned Parenthood's Margaret Sanger Award, a lot of people don't realize that Dr. King was honored by Planned Parenthood in their first year of ever giving out an annual award. And so how many of you knew that? Nobody. How many of you didn't know that? All right, there you are. Well, Dr. King, he wrote this profound speech, and he was, at the time, probably with Reverend Jackson getting arrested someplace in the South. So it was Mrs. King who read the speech for him. But the speech was profound because he said that women's right to family plan was urgent and necessary. He said that it could not be sustained that women could come from the Southern agricultural culture of having 10 kids and go to the North and sustain that. It would forever link women with poverty. And he said the struggle for women's equality is that which attaches to black people and the fight for civil rights. He said that these struggles were deeply intertwined. And it's a profound speech, and I'd urge each of you to take a look at it. But I wanted to ask you a question about how the attitudes that we see in states' legislatures that have involved gerrymandering and where we've seen voter suppression of black folks and Latinos, how does that connect to women? Because I think a lot of people are not necessarily thinking about that kind of legislative action as serving multiple purposes.
Well, I think the term level playing field is really at the heart of it. And that is according women absolute rights in the society, and going with that, of course, taking on the responsibilities of being active citizens. And women did not always do that. They kind of bought into the fact that they were to be taken care of by men. Fortunately, we've seen an evolution of that, hopefully.
Hopefully that's the case. Mr. Rambo is going to come out and take us home. Is that what we're doing, or we got some questions, Mr. Rambo?
That is exactly what
All right.
we're doing.
Okay.
Oh, stop, really, no. Well, first and foremost, one of our questions was more a comment than a question. And it feels appropriate to begin with this sort of appreciation. Reverend Jackson, Rabbi Cohen, we have followed your career, and I'm very grateful that you are here in our town. Comment. Give them a round of applause for that. I concur, however, I come from Minnesota, so in any event, our first question. Some have said that ignoring the alt-right demonstrations would be a better approach than launching counter-protest because it would give them less press, less validation. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
There's a time to allow them to operate on their own momentum, but sometimes silence is betrayal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes silence is consent. As if they show up with 10, we should show up with 10,000. That's a statement to be made. And this is a time to express one's self and one's belief. We cannot allow white supremacists and the KKK and neo-Nazis are staged unto themselves. We must show that as another side of it. In this tug of war, they represent one side of history, and silence cannot be the other side. We can win the war, but we must show up to fight.
You know,
and I think showing up with the power of nonviolence and witness. The beauty of Heather Heyer's death and that tradition of nonviolence, her innocent blood was so powerful, with such redemptive power, and since all unserving is redemptive, her innocent blood made the president shake. It shook the White House, her blood. It shook the Congress on both aisles. It made business folk jump off of boards. It had world leaders speaking, just the power of innocent blood. If she had been killed throwing a rock or shooting a gun, it had been dismissed, but that's power. So whether it is Swearengin and Cheney, or Medgar or Dr. King, there's power in innocent blood. I believe in the power of nonviolence because blood as living sacrifice is a weapon, and we must never give up that weapon. It works for us.
Well, let me add to that. So much has been made, and rightfully so. The beauty of Martin Luther King's speech at the March on Washington, I mean, it was a classic. Some people know, and it's often forgotten, that the speech immediately preceding his at the March on Washington was delivered by Rabbi Joachim Prince, who was the head of the American Jewish Congress at the time. Happened to be a distant relative of mine, but that's for full disclosure. And Dr. Prince said that what he learned from his days as a rabbi in Berlin was that the greatest sin of all was the sin of indifference and silence.
Yes.
And that is something that I think those who protested against the alt-right were buying into that important principle that we cannot be silent, cannot be indifferent when injustice and hatred and xenophobia, whatever that is that corrupts our society, is there. We have to speak out against it and do something about it.
When Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" with the parable he explained, a man was walking down the street attending to his business. He was beaten and robbed and left to die. The rabbi, the minister, the man of God, saw him bleeding. He went to the other side of the street and kept walking. He was indifferent. He didn't want to get blood on his uniform. A man of his own ethnic kin, he went to the other side of the street as well. A Samaritan, for whom they were in conflict, stopped and picked him up. Different color, culture, and language, went beyond. Neighbors are defined by caring, not by race, not by culture. I'm glad the Good Samaritan did not let the man die. That we honor that tradition. We must care. Why am I with DACA workers? It's not, I might add, it's not just Latinos, by the way. They are now putting out 50,000 Haitians, plus Caribbeans. When the Ebola crisis struck a few years ago, 25,000 Africans came. They have been expelled as well. But it doesn't matter. We all are inextricably bound. So whether you're Latino, or black, or brown, or European, or H1B, we all matter. We must accept the premise that we all matter. And once we start making exceptions to who does and does not matter, we're on a different side of history.
Very well said.
I think, Reverend Jackson, that Dr. King, I believe he said that we may not remember the words of our enemies, but we will certainly never forget the silence of our friends. And there's something to be said about that in the conversation that we have here. To continue on with another question.
And this may be our last question, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Oh. I'll make it a good one. Let's see here.
A good one.
Yeah,
I'm sure a good one.
There are two here. I'll see if I can get both of them. I think that this one, I rather like this one, from Susie Bender, Senior Director from the UCI Global Affairs. Colin Kaepernick. They like that. Past San Francisco quarterback has become a polarizing figure in U.S. sports, protesting police brutality toward African Americans and people of color, featured in the Washington Post yesterday. In what ways can the public support him and others who want to see this sort of change happen?
His right to employment is being violated. His right to protest for the right is being denied. And the owners are showing their power to collude one with the other and violate him. I cannot help but think of the role that athletes have played down through history. Whether it was David fighting Goliath, God has called upon athletes to use their skills in the best ways, or whether it was the role that played biblically by Samson. When Jack Johnson fought Jeffries at the time the blacks were being lynched, every heavyweight champion fight created a race riot in the streets, the athlete's body. Joe Louis, Jesse Owens ran in Olympics in 1936. And we remember that Hitler wouldn't shake his hand. And I once asked, I said, Jesse, how'd you feel when Hitler wouldn't shake your hand? He said, well, Hitler wouldn't shake my hand. I came in, Roosevelt wouldn't shake my hand either. Ooh. When Joe Louis beat Max Mellon, what that meant, Jack Robinson breaking that barrier down, or when Kurt Floyd sacrificed his career to open up free agency, or when Muhammad Ali sacrificed his career in boxing with principle anti-war.
And didn't
down through the years, we've seen that, and so Kaepernick is in that tradition. He deserves support. Now, if he were caught peddling drugs or guns in the locker room or being in some other way immorally illicit, he would not deserve support. Kaepernick deserves support. He's earned, and the silence of the commission is shameful. Yesterday, when asked about Kaepernick, the commissioner said, "I'm not a football expert." When I asked about, he's paid by 32 owners, and I have high respect for Mr. Goodell. But to answer that question in such a cavalier fashion, the fact is, 32 teams have decided to boycott him. He's not, and by the way, he said, if I play this year, I made my protest about not standing for the flag. But before you can make the adjustment, the killing can, as he's about to protest, Trump is sending military weapons to police, and Sessions is taking off consent decrees. Athletes should protest, and ministers and rabbis and all of us should protest. And right now, our biggest ally is the camera. That's who's exposing it. But having said all that, I am hopeful that we're getting better. The fact that the protest over the statue depicting secession slavery was a white female, they couldn't just racialize it. The fact that there are thousands more protesting in Boston the next day than in Charlottesville. When we go forward by hope and not backwards by fear, we will win. Let nobody break our spirits. And thank you so very much.
We thank you so tremendously, Reverend Jackson, Rabbi Cohen. Yes, we must keep hope alive. Amen. Ashe. Yes.
I have a new desk. Say at Rev J. Jackson. Twitter. Like me on Facebook. Reverend Jesse Jackson. Keep up with me.
I don't know if we can keep up with this man. He is a hard act to follow. Keep up with him. Please take your seats. This promote the program has not completed as yet. While we're having a seat, would everyone please just take a deep cleansing breath? Doesn't that feel good? My great uncle Nadan lived to be 104 years old. And when asked how he did it, he said, "Boy, air is good." It is good. And the breath, inside the breath, is where spirit and light and love and compassion live and reside. Today we had a very courageous conversation with two dynamic gentlemen and one amazing force of nature, Miss Michelle Goodwin. Yes, yes. And the great words of Johnny Gill, my. I bet you Johnny Gill has never been quoted before, ever, in this sort of environment. Howsoever. And I also go on to say, please, would you kindly, just for a moment before we conclude, close your eyes. And if you can see me, your eyes aren't closed. I see you, brother. I'm going to close my eyes. Mm-hmm. Now, would you kindly point north? Point north. Point north. Now, would everyone open your eyes and look around? All right, case closed. And there's always somebody who's counting on the good one. They point like this. Yes! I believe in that too. Howsoever, the idea of that demonstration was to experiment, was to ask you to remember that we must follow a force. We need a compass, something to direct us, to guide us. The words you've heard here tonight have been those sorts of guiding words. And we must trust that there are people in major intersections there to assist us and guide us forward through the life we have ahead of us.
we are better off, but we can only be better if we make ourselves better. We must use our voices. And there's a song from the Broadway musical Ragtime that asks us to make our voices heard. Today, this afternoon, these two gentlemen have asked us to step forward, to act out, act up, act a fool, but act, do something. And in this song, it asks us to remember to tell our stories. Go out and tell our story. Let it echo far and wide. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And tell them in our struggle how justice was denied. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight, that sometimes there are battles that are more than black or white. And I will not put down my sword when justice was my right. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. Go out and tell our stories to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And tell them in our struggle we were not the only ones. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And say to them the souls of us will always be set free. And you will know that in their voice we will have liberty. And say to those their voices with 10 million righteous men, make them hear you. When they hear you, I'll be near you again. Thank you. Oh, thank you, dear. I say. Yes. You're very kind. And as you're standing together, say to the person next to you, we are power when we are united. We are power when we are united. Please take that power with you as you move out into the space. We thank you again for joining us for the Chancellor's conversation today. And we also want to thank you so much. Travel safely as you go on your way and on your journey. Thank you again, Reverend Jackson, Rabbi Cohen, and Michelle Goodwin.